Okay, well, welcome. I want to thank everybody for attending the first session of what is a three-part series put on by Family Promise of the Verdugos, talking about college financial aid and financial planning and affording higher education. So we're putting on this three-part series to educate participants in that college can happen. Affordability is a huge factor for a lot of households, for a lot of students, and can often sway a student's thinking, planning, and decision-making when it comes to college. So we thought it would be very helpful if we broke this topic up into three different parts. So tonight, we're going to be going over the basics of financial aid. So college can happen. This is our Financial Aid 101. Going over the terminology of financial aid, how financial aid works, where you can access financial aid, and how to find resources and funding for higher education. So whether you have a student who is currently in high school and will be planning to go to college, maybe you have a senior this year who is in the midst of their applications and admissions process, and now you're a parent and you're needing to do the FAFSA, do the CSS profile. Financial aid forms. Maybe you are wondering about Cal Grant and if you qualify. Maybe you're wondering about Pell Grants, Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grants. These are the types of things that we'll be educating you on this evening. And then next week on Tuesday at 6 p.m. in our second part of the series, we're going to be covering funding strategies. So once a student is accepted to a community college, a UC, a Cal State, a private liberal arts school, maybe an out-of-state college, how can a family begin to strategize and plan for covering the cost of attendance between student loans, between parent loans, between grants and scholarships, between no interest loans? What are programs that are out there to sort of put all of these resources and funding together to meet the high cost of college? And then in our third part, in the third week, 3 weeks from now, we're going to actually go step by step through the FAFSA. So if completing the FAFSA is on your horizon, this form just opened up October 1st, and we now have access to it. We're going to walk step by step on how to complete this, how to create an FSA ID for you and your student that's going to act as your electronic signature, and how to go line by line through that FAFSA in order to complete it correctly so that you avoid delays, how to use the IRS data retrieval tool in the FAFSA, all these different things that parents and students are going to have to navigate. We're going to explain it step by step for you. So that's just a preview of what's to come. Tonight, we're going to be talking about financial aid basics. So let's get into it. I want to show you here on the screen on our PowerPoint for this evening, our agenda. We're going to look at overall college facts. What are we working with here when we're talking about college? What are the college costs? We know that college costs are high, but more specifically, if you're a parent with a student who's going to be going into a college, or maybe you're a parent who has a student in college and now your second one's going to be coming through. What are the costs that we're looking at? What are we actually having to navigate? How can we find financial aid? How can we find help to afford college, to make it more affordable? It's one of those sort of life responsibilities that is not cheap. It's a major sticker price that we have to deal with. Understanding terminology, financial aid terminology, we're going to go over that this evening. Things like EFC, a lot of these words that you're going to hear time and time again. What's expected family contribution? The FAFSA, what is this? Federal free application for federal student aid. What is this CSS profile? What is a SAR? What's a Stafford loan, an unsubsidized and subsidized loan? We're going to be going over all this terminology. We're going to look at the two major forms that most households are going to have to complete. And then we're going to look at some lesser known sources of financial aid, like the Pell Grant, like the Cal Grant, like supplemental educational opportunity grants, university grants. We're going to talk about fee waivers. We're going to talk about all those categories of financial aid. We're going to look at statistics. How helpful are colleges? in helping a household meet the full cost of attendance. So we'll be reviewing that as well. And what happens when you get accepted and a school puts together a financial aid package for your household? What does that all mean? How can I decipher a financial aid package? What is what? And can I actually go back and ask for more money? I'll give you some tips and hints on how to do that and how to be successful at that. And then we'll sort of look at then now armed with all that information, now what do I do with it? How do I go and complete these forms? How do I get my student involved in also taking responsibility for the financial sort of side of things, not only just admissions and getting in, but also paying for it too, because it's their education and they're going to be having to navigate this for 4 years as well. A couple of fast facts real quick. Did you know that less than half, and these are astounding, of all college students graduate from the schools they enter as freshmen? Less than half, less than 50% of college students graduate from the schools that they were initially accepted to as freshmen. That's interesting. Why is that? After 6 years of college, nearly half still don't have an undergraduate degree. So they're not getting in and out in 4. It's taking them even longer, which means for us as parents, which means for us as adults, it's costing us more money. Or if the burden is on the student to pay for college, to find financial aid, it's now taking an additional 2 years of funding to get them through to get that degree. Over a third of college students drop out before graduating, and this is sad, due to financial pressures, right? They can't afford tuition. They can't afford the cost of living. Financial aid is being taken away from them. Costs are just increasing due to inflation each year, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. 10% of students attend 3 or more colleges on average before finally earning their degree. And 85% of college grads are moving back home even after graduating. Why? You can sort of see where all these questions are leading. Why is this? Why is this happening? Well, some of it is due to obviously the lack of proper college financial planning, right? A lot of it is due to inadequate sort of college research, students not doing their homework and really finding best fit schools that have the personalities that match up with their own personal personalities, right? So there's this disconnect that's happening where maybe their peers around them, they're all applying to USC. So I guess I'm going to apply to USC because all my friends want to go there. But maybe that's not a good school for them. Sort of that, follow the herd mentality, right? Yeah, that's definitely a part of it. A lot of times this is due to just the lack of understanding in college admissions and financial aid, right? But the biggest factor in the answers to a lot of these questions in terms of why this is happening is because students do not understand the true cost of college. They do not understand the financial aid and funding side of going to school, right? And so while it would be amazing to be a Trojan and to go to USC, right? Students aren't being realistic and setting the right sort of expectations. Parents aren't having conversations with their students about expectations when it comes to affording a $75,000 a year USC education. And so as soon as students face the reality of that, then they have to make these hard decisions about maybe I can't take as many classes because I can't afford it. Maybe I have to have a part-time job. And so now they start working more than they're going to school, right? All of these sorts of financial pressures are affecting a student's success in getting in and getting out in 4 years and helping families afford this. Now, if you also then multiply that by not just having one student, but some families have 2 kids, some families have 3 kids, and sometimes those students are in college at the same time. So imagine multiplying that USC sticker price by 3. Imagine having one after another. Imagine having overlap where you have a senior and a freshman, right? Yeah, these are big numbers. And that's why this is a serious topic and why students and parents need to do their homework. So let's just look real quickly at some college facts. There are plenty of schools across the nation, over 4,000, between 4-year private institutions, public and state institutions, and even 2-year community college options, right? There is no lack of choice, right? So there's definitely competition in the education space. And let's be clear about this, that colleges and universities, they are a business. They are a business. They're there to make money, to fund those campuses, to pay those teachers, to have cutting edge technology, to have the latest and greatest buildings, dormitories, computer labs, you name it, right? So these big numbers are for a reason. So to stay relevant, colleges need customers and they need to charge those customers big bucks, right? But because the competition is great, that sort of helps us as the quote unquote consumer of education, right? So that we don't just have to be looking at USC, right? We don't have to just be looking at Harvard. We have plenty of options. And that's why I sort of show us these numbers so that we can start thinking about how do we create a diversified list of colleges that our student will apply to, not just academically, not just about what they're looking for, but in terms of cost as well, because we have to be considering affordability, right? So just because some colleges cost $85,000 a year, NYU, doesn't mean that I have to go there. There's other ways or other paths that I can take to get my degree, right? It's about understanding what those options are. And we have over 4,000 of them, right? So between those schools, one of the things that I mentioned that's happening is it's taking longer and longer for students to graduate. So if you look at what's happening with our schools being impacted, thousands upon thousands of students are going to college. The competition has never been greater, right? And colleges are having to rapidly expand to facilitate all these students coming to college. But the downside is that now there's even greater competition on the students' part to get their classes. And in the last several years, as we've seen, teachers, professors have been furloughed. There have been state budget cuts, deficits, for example, in the UC system. Like, they're not receiving funding from the state, from the federal government. And so it's affecting the students' classes and it's taking them longer to graduate, right? So a lot of colleges right now, if you're doing research, will start touting in and out in 4 is what they call it, right? Or some sort of paraphrased like slogan of that, right? Out in 4. They're really hyping up the fact that they can get your student through and graduated on time. So now we're even looking at a typical undergraduate degree, not taking 4 years, but possibly 5, possibly 6 years. And that just means extra expense, right? So we also have to be sort of realistic about that expectation as well, that it could take our students longer to graduate. Look at what's happening to college costs. On average, tuition is increasing by 8 to 9% per year. And depending on the school, like a private liberal arts school, sometimes we see tuition costs go up by 20% per year, right? So in addition to tuition and fees, what is the big moneymaker for a lot of colleges as businesses? Room and board. That's where they're making their money, right? It's expensive to live on campus. It's expensive to have a meal plan, but that's where colleges make their money, right? And so when you put tuition and fees and then all the incidental costs of student healthcare, an ID card, the student rec fee, if you add all those up and then you put on top of that room and board, the average public in-state school is somewhere around $21,000, right? But take a look at what that means for us here in our Cal State system. Our Cal State system has 23 campuses. Depending on the campus, that could range anywhere from $20,000 to $28,000 per year. These are annual cost of attendance, right? On average. The UC system, it has 9 campuses. We do have a UC San Francisco, which is only for medicine, right? So technically we have 10 UCs, range anywhere from $30,000 to $37,000, right? Private colleges, private liberal arts schools, they could be small schools. They could be medium-sized private schools, range anywhere from $38,000 to $70,000. And then highly selective, what I mean by that is Ivy League schools, public Ivies. They could range anywhere above $70,000, right? And last year, I had a student get into NYU who was there and considering going, that was her #1 school. And they said, look, your cost of attendance is going to be $85,000. And that was with no financial aid. That is just huge, huge. So here we are having our students apply to these types of schools, get in, right, and start building their dreams on these schools. And then we have to come to them and say, wow, $85,000 a year. That's like, we're letting our teenagers make almost a $500,000 decision on where they want to go to school, right? Yeah. This is up there with like purchasing a home. That's why these numbers matter. That's why we have to be serious about it and why we have to do our planning early. We can't just start letting our students get into school and then say, well, I guess we better figure out financial aid now. We need to do this earlier and earlier and earlier. So if you have a student who's a sophomore, a junior, now's the time to be looking at this and to start strategizing, to start planning. That's what we'll talk about next time. Start making yourself informed of these numbers, how colleges work with these numbers. Now's a good time to start doing what's called net price calculators. If you're doing your initial research on schools, go to their website, go to their financial aid page and find out, based on your household income and assets, what does it look like based on your income and assets that NYU, USC, UCLA, what are they going to end up charging you in tuition, cost of attendance, room and board, based on your financial need? Like, let's start figuring out these numbers now. When we talk about COA or cost of attendance, when you look at a school's cost of attendance on their website, when you see it in Peterson's or the FISC guide, a lot of these guides that students use to look at profiles of schools and to do their research, what does that actually mean when we look at the sticker price and you say, Bryan, NYU is $85,000? What does that mean? What every college tries to do every single year is report and line item out on their website their total cost of attendance between direct costs and indirect costs. And they try to break that down based on tuition and fees, right? These they know. And so they can give you a specific quote as to what tuition is going to be for this coming year based on a full-time schedule, a part-time schedule based on number of units that you're taking, however your student needs to break that down. Any fees, like we said before, student health insurance, ID card, parking, they have all those numbers figured out to the dollar, right? They also have that based on room and board. But what they publish on the website is the average student expense for room and board. So what I mean by average is, let's say your student's going to live on campus. Room and board for most colleges means double occupancy with the average meal plan. So average meaning not unlimited, right? Not unlimited swipes where your student could eat 7 times a day if they wanted. But typically average means 2 meals a day, right? So if your student wants to eat less, obviously the cost would be lower. If your student's going to do unlimited, it would be more expensive. If your student wants to have their own room and be single occupancy, it would be more. If your student decides to bunk with 3 other people and it's, you know, quadruple occupancy, the cost goes down, right? So it all sort of depends. That's where we start getting into this gray area where when it comes to direct costs and then indirect costs, colleges are only guesstimating what you could potentially pay in any given year, right? So their published price, and this is my disclaimer, their published price could be, what you end up paying could be more or it could be less, depending on some of these sort of gray areas, right? They also try to figure out in total, what would your student pay in that academic year for books, right? Now, students can get creative. They may have classes where they don't actually physically have a book. All the materials are online. Maybe they share materials online. Maybe they share a book, an actual physical book with a classmate. I mean, students are getting creative in terms of lowering those incidentals, right?
They have to.
So, yeah, they have to. So books might not be exactly the published price of what the school is quoting, right? Oftentimes too, you'll see that schools will try to have a line item for living or personal expenses. And you'll see a school say, well, we think that a student's probably gonna have to spend somewhere around $3,000 per year in personal expenses, right? And you're going, what is my student gonna spend $3,000 on? They could be thinking of things like, well, they're gonna need a laptop. They're gonna need to outfit their dorm room. Things like that, they sort of try to bundle in this living expense sort of bucket, right? And then they also try to give you a quote in terms of transportation costs. What is it going to cost to get the student to school, right? And then get them home. So for example, I had a student go to Princeton one year, and Princeton said, your transportation costs as part of your overall cost of attendance is probably going to be somewhere around $900. So we know that Princeton is in New Jersey. This student is from Southern California. If a family is budgeting $900, their student is going to get to Princeton probably, and then probably not come home for Thanksgiving on that budget, right? Probably come home for Christmas, and then go back and never come home until summertime. Because travel to the East Coast, to New York, can be expensive.
Yes, it
right?
can be.
So, yeah, sometimes these budgets that colleges create are just not exact, but they're doing their best to guesstimate. So we just have to know, okay, direct costs are very clear. This is what the school knows. These indirect costs, they're just trying to estimate for us, right? So the big question becomes, if college is so expensive, how much aid is actually available to us? So what I tried to do is gather up some financial aid information just to give us an idea, an overall visual of where financial aid is actually coming from. So the way that I think of financial aid is, I think of it like, and this is very sort of appropriate for October, I think of it like Halloween. Okay, so when I was a kid, when I was in elementary school, I had this really cool jack-o'-lantern trick-or-treating pail that had a battery underneath that when you turned it on, it would light up this little jack-o'-lantern pail. And I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. And I was so proud of that. And I would go around the neighborhood trick-or-treating, and I would see these high school kids with like normal clothes on, a gorilla mask, and a pillowcase. And I always thought, wow, what slackers, you know what I mean? They can't even get a costume together, and they got this ugly trick-or-treating like bag. And then I realized, as I got older, you know what? Those high school kids were pretty smart. So there I was with my little jack-o'-lantern pail, and that thing would fill up pretty quickly. And there they were with these huge pillowcases. Financial aid is the same way. We sort of have to go around the neighborhood with giant pillowcases trying to collect as much financial aid as possible, right? So if we're talking about funding and affording college, we got to go out with the pillowcases. We got to gather up as much money as possible. So as you can see here, a large portion of where monies are coming from for financial aid is in the form of student loans, right? Almost half of financial aid is in the form of student or parent loans, almost 50%, right? So it's very obvious that we're borrowing as a strategy to pay for higher education, right? And a lot of families will say, well, I'm sort of adverse to debt. Well, definitely, we should definitely be adverse to that, but sometimes it's just not practical, right? We would all love to buy a home without debt as well, but sometimes we can't get that home without taking on debt. We can't get that car without taking on debt. The same thing is true of education. And I would say that in terms of like what's good debt, what's bad debt, education is a better debt, right? So we can't take out a loan for retirement, right? But we can take out loans for education. So because a large amount of funding comes in the form of loans, we may have to be open to considering our student taking on some of that debt. We may have to consider as parents taking on some of that debt. But there's definitely strategies to manage that, to keep that debt down, and then also be able to sort of pay it out the backside when the student is done. And we'll talk about that in future sessions. A lot of money comes through federal grants, almost 12%. A lot of money comes through the state. We'll talk about Cal Grant, right? A lot of funding comes from the actual college itself. So private schools, liberal arts schools have better funding models because they're collecting from alumni. They're investing those alumni funds in what they call endowments. Those are investment funds that grow those contributions, and then they're able to give out scholarships from it, right? But the smallest sliver of financial aid that is out there is in the form of private sources or private grants and scholarships. So why do I emphasize this? Because gone are the days of, oh, my son's, quarterback of the football team, he'll get a free 4-year ride. It's just not happening anymore. Gone are the days of like getting that 4-year full ride scholarship. They're just few and far between. So unless your student is a National Merit Scholar on the PSAT, unless they're in a specialized program, that funding is few and far between. And that's why it's the smallest sliver on this chart. So we can't just sort of sit by and just like hope, okay, my student's going to go out and get a $50,000 Coca-Cola scholarship, right? It's just few and far between. So what is financial aid based on? What are colleges looking at to determine if you qualify for financial aid? In general, it's based on two things. It's based on need and it's based on merit. So you're like, well, Brian, I definitely need it. Well, not exactly that need, but it's need as determined by your household income and assets. So that's why we have to fill out financial aid forms in order to report to the federal government, the Department of Education, and then ultimately to colleges. What income do we bring into our household? What assets do we have that we could potentially use to fund college? And then from there, our need for financial aid is determined by the Department of Education and colleges, okay? So a majority of financial aid is based on financial need, not just because you say you need it. Okay, so the FAFSA is going to assess income and assets, and I'll talk exactly about what that means.
Lenny's like, just so you know, if you have questions at any time, or if you want to put it in chat or unmute yourself, feel free to.
Oh yeah, for
away,
sure.
just so you know.
I should stop and say, yeah, this is not meant to be a lecture. I just get so excited about it that I just tend to overtalk. So feel free to interrupt me anytime. I'd love to field any kind of questions. A lot of parents believe that GPA, right, a student's academic performance affects financial need-based aid. No. GPA never crosses paths with FAFSA or the CSS profile. The only time that GPA and need-based aid cross paths and go together is on state funding like the Cal Grant. Okay, so to qualify for the Cal Grant, which is funding from the state of California, your student has to have a minimum GPA and you have to demonstrate need. And I'll talk specifically about those income and asset ceilings when we get to Cal Grant. Financial aid is also based on merit. Here's where you could get a grant or a scholarship from a college based on a student's academic performance, performance on their SAT, on their GPA, right? Maybe they have a specific talent. Maybe they're an athlete, maybe they're a musician, an artist. They can receive funding because of, say, their portfolio, or maybe they've been scouted and then recruited to play a specific sport.
Thank God.
Right? Other times, merit aid is separate from the admissions application, and a student has to fill out a separate scholarship application. They have to write an essay for it. Maybe it's based on eligibility because of their major. Maybe they're applying for an engineering scholarship, a nursing scholarship. So a lot of times, even higher income families, or even middle-class families in America, who we feel like we're pinching every penny in terms of financial aid forms, in terms of need-based aid, we don't qualify, right? And so it's sometimes frustrating, and parents will come to me and say, you know what, Bryan, I feel like in LA, high cost of living, I don't make anything. And it's probably true that you're stretched super thin. But in terms of financial aid, you may not qualify for need-based aid. But I tell every family, regardless, right? So parents will come to me and say, oh, forget it. I'm not doing the financial aid forms. We won't qualify. I always make them do it. Always, always, always. Because sometimes to qualify even for a grant or a scholarship, or get money from a school's endowment fund, get that presidential scholarship because of a 3.8 GPA, they will make sure that the student has a completed financial aid file. So even if you don't qualify through FAFSA, they want to see that in order to get this scholarship, that you've dotted your I's and crossed your T's and turned in everything that the college has asked for, right? The other reason to turn it in is, even if you think you don't qualify, is what happens next year if you do qualify. Colleges will look back as a point of comparison and say, wow, this family is now requesting financial aid. Why? Well, let's look at last year. They didn't file anything. They obviously didn't need it. So what's going on? So if they don't have anything to compare it to, you're going to have to sort of scramble. So I always advise that a student, a family, always does their financial aid every single year of their undergrad experience, because the college requires it, and you never know what's going to happen. So if Bill Gates were sitting here with us today, net worth of billions of dollars, I would tell him to do the FAFSA for his son. I would tell him to do the CSS profile, because if Microsoft imploded tomorrow and he lost his net worth, he would have to prove to his son's college that they needed help, right? And if he didn't have a history of doing that, it's just going to make it much more difficult. So when we say this word financial aid, what do we actually mean? What's actually included in this definition? I've encountered parents who believe that when we use the term financial aid, that means just free money. Oh, my student's getting financial aid. They're getting free money. No, that is not true. That's incorrect. So the full, complete definition, when a college says financial aid, it means three things. It's a combination of, yes, free money, grants and scholarships, right? Loans or borrowed money, money that has to be paid back either by the student and or the parent, right? And the third kind of money is money that's worked for in the form of work study or a campus job, right? So that's what a college is defining as financial aid. So you have to be careful, because if a college says, oh, we give 100% financial aid to help our students afford the cost of college, that can be deceiving, because that could be all loans. That could be 100% loans. So that's not as helpful as it sounds.
Right.
Right? So again, I want to be clear that when we say financial aid, it's a combination of these three terms: free money, money that's borrowed or paid back, and money that's worked for, right? So financial aid is not just by definition free money. Okay, just making that clear. So how do these forms determine our financial need? Here's what colleges do on a simple, basic 4th grade math level, right? They take their total cost of attendance, they subtract out what the FAFSA believes is our EFC, our expected family contribution. So we fill out this form to get this ultimate number, this EFC, our expected family contribution. That is what the form calculates to be our out-of-pocket costs. What the form believes we can afford to pay out of pocket, whether we can or can't. It's just crunching the numbers on our income and assets to come up with our expected family contribution. So the college, let's say the college costs $25,000 a year in our PowerPoint example. And we do the FAFSA, and based on our income and assets, the FAFSA spits out our EFC saying your EFC is $10,000, your expected family contribution out of pocket to pay towards college for that year, not total 4 years, but for that year is $10,000. The college subtracts what we're going to pay out of pocket and then says, Johnny, the student, needs $15,000 more in financial aid after parents have paid 10 to meet the full cost of attendance of $25,000, right? But remember, based on our definition, that $15,000, right, in need could come in the form of loans, free money, and work study money.
Okay.
So obviously, the lower our EFC, yay, that's a better thing for us. We want a lower EFC or a lower expected family contribution, because the college will then look at that and say, well, they need additional help because they cannot afford to pay a large sum out of pocket, right? So the college uses this EFC not as exactly what you're going to pay out of pocket. We have to be clear about that. They use it as a guideline to say, well, in this example, Johnny's family can only afford to pay $10,000 out of pocket. So if I'm Johnny's dad, I may not have 10,000 sitting somewhere in savings. I may not have a 529 college savings plan where I can take $10,000 from. I may not have saved up $10,000 since Johnny was born in his name to pay for college, right? But it's just the form telling the college, based on what they made in a particular tax year and based on their assets, they should be able to afford $10,000 a year, whether you have the money or not. Okay. So obviously families are always looking to get this number down, right? So it can be optimized and we can lower that number if we start planning early. And sometimes if we're in certain situations where we can affect our taxable income. So for example, those of us that are self-employed, right? You have so many deductions and tax credits and write-offs to lower your adjusted gross income, right? Because as we're going to see, the two main factors in determining that EFC is income and assets. So the lower our reportable income, the lower our EFC. Some of us can't do anything about it because we're W-2 wage earners. Like we can't do anything. It is what it is. In that case, there may not be anything that's possible to do in lowering your EFC. But that's where a discussion with the college would actually be helpful. And we'll talk about that later when we talk about appeals. Okay. So here is what goes into the expected family contribution, right? So they look at parent income and parent assets. And they also look at student income and student assets. So when we cover the FAFSA form in session number 3, the data that we're going to need to input into the FAFSA is parent income and parent assets, student income and student assets. So as you can see from our table here, the parent contribution due to income makes up a large percentage of the calculation, right? So anywhere from 22 to 47% on a sliding scale of a household's income is going to go into that calculation to determine your EFC. So obviously, the more money you make, the less financial aid you get. And then depending on the parent asset and the type of asset, it could be assessed anywhere from 2.6 to 5.6%. So 5.6 at the most. So for example, let's just use even numbers. Let's say we had that $10,000 sitting in a savings account for college. We're going to use it for college. Well, we're going to have to report it as an asset on the FAFSA. But the FAFSA is only going to look at 5.6% of that $10,000 as saying, well, mom and dad can use $560 of it towards college. So they're not counting 100% of it to go to college because they know we have other things to save for in life, right? But up to 5.6%. And look at how the numbers jump when it's the student's money, right? So if the student has income, 50% of it is being assessed. Why? Because students don't make anything. They don't make that much. So more of it is assessed, right? If you've saved in your student's name, right, 20% of it is assessed compared to the parent's 5.6. So for those of you that are trying to do some early planning, let's say, you know, Johnny, when he was born, you just set up a savings account for him at the bank and you piled in, you know, birthday money and Christmas money, and that was going to be his college account. If he's the owner of that account, when he files for FAFSA, they're going to look at 20% of it, right? So in our $10,000 example, let's say it was in your student's name, $2,000 of it, the FAFSA is going to expect your student to use for college, right? There's some other types of accounts that if people have questions on, things like UTMAs and UGMAs, those are uniform transfer to minor accounts. They're like trust accounts that you can open at banks, where the parent is the owner and the child is the beneficiary. That way you have control over it. You could do what you want with it. A lot of times this will sort of bite families in the behind because those accounts will switch ownership from the beneficiary. The child will become owner at age of maturity. What is typically age of maturity? 18. Depending on the state, it could be 21. Just depends on where you live. But when is a student applying to college? Right around 18,
right?
Right? So those accounts, you thought, oh, they're in my name. You know, they won't be assessed at Johnny's rate. Well, he's going to turn age of maturity right when we're filling out the FAFSA. Those assets are going to turn into his assets, and we're going to have to report them as his assets. And they're going to be assessed at a much larger or higher percentage. So let me give you some estimates of expected family contribution based on household income, just to give you an idea, because parents are always asking me, well, we make $50,000. What does that mean? What is the college going to expect us to make at that income, or expect us to pay at that income level? So here are some general sort of boundaries, but it's based on some assumptions that there's 4 in the household, that only 1 student of the 4 in the household is going to be in college, that parent assets are less than $50,000, and that the older parent is at least 50 years of age. The reason I have these sort of qualifications is because one thing that the FAFSA does consider is household size, how many are in college, and the age of the parents. Because as you get closer to retirement age, because we do have parents who had children late, they adopted late, so they're much older. The FAFSA gives those households a break the closer they are to retirement, because they know you're going to have to fund the high cost of college and then retirement. So you're juggling saving for retirement, saving and spending for college at the same time. So in general, if it was a single parent or two parents, dual income, and adjusted gross income was somewhere around $50,000, the expected family contribution would be around $2,500. That's what they would expect you to pay out of pocket. Now, colleges, remember, aren't going to stick to that number. That's a guideline that they're getting from FAFSA. So a college could say, they can only afford $2,500. That's great, but because we cost $75,000 a year, mom and dad are going to have to cough up a lot more. And you'll see parents on the hook for $30,000, $40,000. And they're like, wait, Bryan, my FAFSA said I could only afford $2,500. Well, it's the cost of the college. It's so expensive, right? That a lot of it has to come back onto the shoulders of the parents. If you have dual income, you make $100,000 a year. You could see the EFC goes up dramatically, right? So a lot of times, middle America, their EFC skyrockets with dual income because their adjusted gross income goes up, and they're sort of priced out of college in that they might as well just write checks for it, right? So for example, if you made $150,000 a year in combined income, I mean, your EFC is going to be $30,000 or more. So you might have to just pay the full price if your student goes to a UC. Because the UC is going to look at that EFC and go, oh, they can afford $30,000, $35,000, even if you technically can't afford it. And they're going to just say, well, you can just pay the full cost, whether you can or can't. So just some general guidelines there. So what is actually being assessed on these two different forms, on the FAFSA, on the CSS profile? Well, Bryan, you keep saying FAFSA, you keep saying CSS profile. So again, let me clarify. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. It unleashes 99.999% of any kind of financial aid. Borrowed, worked for, federal, state, school-related aid. I mean, there's no other way for me to say you have to do the FAFSA. You just have to do it. It unleashes any kind of financial aid. If you have not done it, it's going to present an obstacle. So
you're saying you have to do the FAFSA, Bryan? Is that what you're saying?
That's basically what I'm saying. You have to do the FAFSA. Like I said, I would tell Bill Gates to do the FAFSA, right? The CSS profile, not every school takes. Only certain private schools. So it's about somewhere between 300 to 400 schools, private schools across the nation, will take or ask for this additional form, the CSS profile. The organization that has formulated this form and administers this form is the College Board. So for parents, your student, if they're taking the SAT, if they've taken AP exams, that is all through College Board. College Board also administers the CSS profile. Okay, so why do some schools ask for this and some schools don't? Some private schools ask for the CSS profile because before they give your student merit aid or scholarships, they want to poke around and ask more questions about your income and assets than what the FAFSA does. So it's a way for them to not only audit your answers on the FAFSA, but then ask additional questions. right? So I'll show you the difference in what is assessed so you could see like what extra things are they asking about that the FAFSA doesn't cover. Okay, so let's look at this. The FAFSA is obviously based on your income. So the FAFSA is always based on 2 years prior tax return data. So for example, if you have a senior this year and they're going to be an incoming freshman for fall of 2021, your FAFSA is going to be based on your tax returns, your federal tax returns, 2 years before 2021, which is your 2019 completed returns. Now you're saying, why are they looking so far back? I mean, my income could have changed drastically, or I could have had an amazing year, Brian, in 2019. Why don't they take 2020? I had a horrible year. It was COVID, right? Well, it used to be 5+ years ago that they would take the year prior. But the problem is that parents were not getting their tax returns done in time. And so schools were waiting and waiting and waiting, and people filing extensions and all this. And then these numbers would have to change after these parents were finally getting their tax returns done. So they moved to this model of what they call prior year, or 2 years prior. So that's why we're looking back 2 years ago on your tax return data. Okay. So it's going to be based on your federal tax return. It's going to be based on your liquid funds. So first, liquid assets, cash, savings, checking, any CDs, money markets, basically any sort of bank accounts, right? So a lot of times parents start freaking out. Brian, oh my gosh, am I going to have to give a college all my bank statements? No. They only ask for the value of those accounts on the day you sign and submit the FAFSA. So it's based on an honor policy. I've never seen a college actually ask for bank statements. You don't have to upload your bank statements into the FAFSA. Okay, so there's none of that. They will also assess non-retirement accounts. So investment accounts, where you have invested in stocks, bonds, mutual funds, anything that's an investment account, but non-IRA, 401k, 403b, anything that's not qualified retirement, they're going to ask about. So if you wanted to dabble in the stock market and you have a Vanguard account, you're going to have to report the value of that. But again, no statements, just you input on the honor system the value. Okay. The FAFSA does not look at the value of your retirement accounts. So a lot of parents will panic and be like, Brian, I've saved for 25+ years into my 401k. Are they going to ask me to tap into that to pay for college? No, FAFSA does not ask about that. The only thing that they ask about in the form about your retirement is, what did you contribute to that 401k or IRA in that tax year? So in that 2019 tax year, did you put $10,000 from your wages into your 401k? Why does the college want to know that? Because they're going to say, well, they obviously save for retirement, so maybe they can divert some of those contributions towards college. That's why they ask about contributions. Okay, here's a big myth that I want to dispel. They do not assess your home equity. So I have parents panicking too. Oh, we own a home, we're never going to qualify, right? They do not assess your home equity in your primary residence. But the FAFSA will ask about second properties. If you own land, if you own a vacation home, a rental, and you're receiving passive income, they're going to ask about other properties, because those are going to be considered investments. Okay. Some of you may have insurance contracts that have cash value. Okay, you may have a whole life, a universal life insurance policy where cash value is building up, right? You're being paid interest on a part of your premiums as a savings vehicle. FAFSA does not ask about those. Now, let's compare that to what the private schools want to know a little bit more about on the CSS profile. Okay. The CSS profile will ask about home ownership. So they will ask about your primary residence. What year did you buy it? What did you buy it for? What's your current mortgage balance? What's your monthly mortgage payment? And if you were to sell it within the next 30 days, what would it be valued at? Again, Brian, are they going to ask me to tap into my home equity? No. But a private school, before they give out from their endowment, wants to see, are you setting yourself up long-term for retirement? Do you have these long-term assets that can fund retirement, right? So they're trying to just better and more specifically assess need, okay, by asking about your home. They also, FAFSA does not ask about what you save for younger siblings of your student. So maybe you have a couple more along the way too, and you've got, things saved up, college savings plans, things like that for them. Private schools want to know about that, right? The FAFSA, if you are self-employed or you own a small business, if you have 100 or less employees, you do not have to report your business as an asset. And pretty much a majority of companies in California that are small businesses or are owned by self-employed individuals definitely have less than 100 employees. Right. However, private schools on the CSS profile are going to ask about your self-employed business. So if you're a sole proprietor, an LLC, an S Corp, a C Corp, they're going to ask about it. They're going to want info about your business. They're going to want to see your business return, gross receipts, gross expenses, the year it was started. Like, they're going to want to know more because they know on tax returns that business owners can write off a lot more. For most people, they are their business. So there's really no like equipment or commercial buildings or things that they own. They are the business, right? And so in those cases, that's very simple. There's really no value to assess, right? And then like we were talking about with annuities and cash value life insurance policies, the CSS profile will ask about that. Now, to get even more specific, the CSS profile, depending on the school, may ask questions like, how many vehicles does the household own? What year, make, and model are they? Are they leased? Are they owned? What is your monthly payment? So they'll even start asking you about number of vehicles. They'll ask questions like, is the student a beneficiary of a trust? Maybe grandma and grandpa set up a trust where they specifically dictated that assets from this trust need to be used for education only. Well, the college wants to know, hey, you have a source, you got to start taking from that before we give you any of our money, right? So they'll ask about trusts. The CSS profile will ask about anticipated income. So not just what happened in 2019, but what are you expecting to make in 2020? And can you forecast what you'll make in 21? So it's not just backwards looking and not just present looking, but it's also forward looking as well. If you have kids in private school, right, and you pay towards tuition for those other kids, they're going to ask about that. So a lot more questions sort of about what do you own and the money that you're bringing in, where is it going? The nice thing about the CSS profile that I like in comparison to the FAFSA is the CSS profile has a special circumstances box that allows you to write in special situations about your financial situation that are not addressed anywhere on the form, that are not addressed, say, in the FAFSA. For example, let's say you had to take on a lot of credit card debt. FAFSA doesn't ask about credit card debt. CSS profile doesn't ask about credit card debt. But maybe for some reason, you had a hospitalization, you had to retain an attorney, you I don't know, you had a roof that had a leak and it had to be repaired, and you put $20,000 on a credit card. You can talk about that in the special circumstances box. Maybe you have a tax lien. You owe the government in back taxes. You could talk about that. Maybe you have an aging parent that you're having to help take care of. You're in that sandwich generation where you're having to help your mom with groceries and pay for your kids' college. You're stuck in the middle, right? Special circumstances box, you can explain that, right? So it gives you more ways to talk about, okay, on paper, it looks like we're making good money, but it's really going all these other places, right? So how do we apply for the FAFSA? We'll go over that in session 3, but just in general, it's online. It's meant to be simple, but it's not always that simple to navigate. It's sort of like the 1040 EZ, where like if you printed out the 1040 EZ tax form, that's 1 page. But if you got the instruction booklet, it's like 75 pages to fill out 1 piece of paper. That's sort of how FAFSA is. The FAFSA now opens. It used to open on January 1st, but now it opens October 1st. So last week, the FAFSA opened up for the 2021-2022 school year. So what sorts of documents are you going to need to reference? Well, based on what we talked about that was assessed, you're going to need your 2019 tax returns. You're going to need to access your bank statements, investment statements, not print them off. We don't need to upload them or anything, but you need to just check their current values. All right, so a lot of us will do that online. If your student filed a return, you'll need that to reference. Most of the things that you need for the form are going to be top of mind. Social security numbers, addresses, contact information, things like that. When we walk through the form, we'll talk about that. But for the most part, I think you'll have direct access to everything. There's not a lot that you have to hunt and gather. Okay. Once you complete the FAFSA and submit it, it will generate what's called the SAR, the Student Aid Report. On that Student Aid Report, it will tell you your expected family contribution, your EFC. Then you can take that number and use that sort of as your baseline of like, okay, income and assets, this is based on that. This is what it looks like FAFSA is going to be telling schools that we can afford to pay out of pocket. Can you get an expected family contribution number before you submit the FAFSA? Yes. There's a nice little tool on the FAFSA website that's called the FAFSA Forecaster. It's like a calculator where you could just go answer some questions about your 2019 income and assets, and it will, not to the dollar, but pretty close, it will give you a guesstimate of your EFC. It's a nice tool to use. This is not what the FAFSA webpage looks like this year, but basically it's an entire online process, right? Where it's meant to be in a simplified step-by-step manner where you could go in, you could fill out some things, save, exit, log out, and come back to it. So you don't have to fill it all out in one sitting. Okay. So sometimes parents panic because they're like, I don't know answers to these questions. I got to go look. What if it erases my data or whatever? You would literally not have to be saving anything to lose your data. You can leave the app, you can come back. You could do it over the course of several days, months, whatever. Once you do the FAFSA, then you've got to check with your student to see, do we have any private schools that my student is applying to where they need the CSS profile? The way that you'll access the CSS profile is through your student's College Board login. It looks something like this. You just Google CSS profile. It'll take you right to the home page and you'll fill it out for 21, 22. But I wanted to show you this screenshot because of those nice little credit card logos down at the bottom. So the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, is free. The CSS profile costs based on the number of schools you're submitting it to. Just wanted you to be aware of that. That's why there's the credit card logos. So if your student has 5 private schools that they're applying to and they all take the CSS profile, you'll have to pay a general application fee and then an additional $16 per school to submit. So 5 times 16. So sometimes it can really add up.
Yeah.
Just a heads up. Just a heads up. So let's say we did the FAFSA. Let's say we've done the CSS profile. There could also be additional institutional forms that the school wants you to fill out. So you say, Brian, how do I even know this? Well, you got to check the college's financial aid websites. That's one place. But most often, this is going to come up through the student. So once the student applies, they're going to get a student portal, basically a login at every school that they applied to. And within that portal, there are going to be financial aid messages under a financial aid tab or in their to-do tasks, where a college may say, great, thank you for submitting your FAFSA. We got your data. Thanks for submitting your CSS profile. But based on what we took a look at, we need a couple of other things from you. The only reason I bring this up and pause on this is because a lot of times students neglect this. Oh my gosh, there's a financial aid message in my thing. I don't even know what this is about. And they ignore it. And then a deadline passes, or now the parents are getting a call from the school saying we need this or we need that. And it's like, this is new news to us. The reason it's like this, and parents need to understand this, is that college is not like high school, where all of the high school communications go to the parents as well. No. Very little, if any, communication is going to go to parents, because now technically your student is an adult. So to protect identity and personal information and your student's rights as an adult, a lot of the communication will not go to parents, including financial aid, which doesn't make sense to parents because they're like, we're paying the bills. It's going to go to your student. So a couple of things that you'll end up doing is you want to make sure that your student forwards you any of these messages from colleges, gives you their student portal login, or once a student chooses the school that they're going to attend, gives you authorization to pay the bills for them, to look at their grades, things like that. Students have to give you the right as a parent to look at that. It's crazy, but it's for the protection of the students. Now, I want to address one other issue here. Let's say we did the FAFSA, we did the CSS profile, we did the school forms. What about situations, Brian, where we're in a household that's separated, or we're from a divorced household? How does that all work with these forms? So let's pause for a second, because we've talked about business. I've never come across anyone yet, anyways, that had to fill out forms because they own a farm. So if you own a farm, I'd be interested in talking to you, because I've yet to go through that process in my 23 years of doing this. So I would be fascinated by that, actually. But the separated and the divorced is obviously coming up quite often. So how does FAFSA want income and assets to be reported in a divorced or separated household? Here's the rule. The reporting parent on the FAFSA is the parent with which the student lives a majority of the last 12 months with, right? So sometimes parents are like, well, it's sort of 50-50, Brian. They spend equal time at both households. Well, then it's really sort of up to you and the other biological parent who the reporting parent is going to be. Okay. So then typically parents will want to use the parent for whom the student receives the most financial resources from. Okay, so even though they may spend time 50-50 with both parents, right, it should be the reporting parent who is the one that provides the most financial resources in that situation, right? Parents will often just use the parent who makes less income, right, as the reporting parent. If the parent who is reporting on the FAFSA has remarried, right, that new spouse, their income and assets have to be a part of the FAFSA. You say, well, it's a step parent, like they have no sort of financial obligation. Well, according to FAFSA, yes, they do. Okay. So in terms of the CSS profile for private schools, a majority of them are going to ask about, hey, wait a second, where's the other biological parent? You said you guys are divorced or remarried. Where's biological dad or where's biological mom? And they may ask that other parent to also do a CSS profile. And if they've remarried, that other new step parent's income and assets must also be on the form. So you may also ask, oh, Brian, what about in the situation where the one of the biological parents provides no financial support, like they don't even have contact with the student? You can do with a school what's called a non-custodial waiver form, where you sign and tell that school, look, Johnny has no contact with dad, and dad provides zero financial support.
Hi, Brian. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
I'm actually here. I work at a school, and I'm actually here because my student, but unfortunately my student couldn't join. She just told me because she is Vietnamese, so her mom was kind of weirded out for her to just be on her own.
Of course.
So she wanted her brother to go with her.
Sure.
But and also I'm just joining fast because I have to put my toddler to sleep soon too. So
bedtime.
But my questions are specific to they are from Vietnam. So when you were saying that they needed taxes to file from 2 years ago, I don't even know if her mom had taxes. So
okay, so do you know if the student has student visa? Like, are they a resident alien? Do they have a green card?
I think they have a green card. And that was the other issue we were dealing with too, is that will she be able to even apply for financial aid? She's been in high school, I think, for 2 years. And I know when I recently became a resident, I know you had to be like in school for 3 years in California. I don't know if that's changed or graduated from a high school.
Yeah, what the FAFSA asks in terms of residency is, have you been a resident of California for at least 5 years?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that is a question on the FAFSA.
So if they haven't, does that mean she won't be able to apply for any financial aid, or?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
So, I mean, this is a very, very unique situation because now we're talking about DACA student, so I think these specific questions, do you know what kinds of schools she's interested in applying to?
Well, see, that's the thing, is we're trying to help her because she has like no idea. This is her senior year and she hasn't really applied to anything or done anything.
Yeah.
And they're like amazing students. I don't know if you know anything from Vietnam. They're like hardcore studying, like
of course,
their whole life.
Of course.
So, I mean, I really want to help her, but I don't know
Yeah.
like how to go about it. I
Yeah.
mean,
Do you mind if I ask what high school this is at?
she's at John Burroughs in Burbank.
Oh yeah, Burroughs High
Okay,
School.
yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, this is actually going to really sort of take some strategizing and planning.
Okay.
So what
mean,
yeah.
You can email me for like, I know I don't want to take up your time. Email me maybe, or I can email you about like what you would like me to ask them
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
see, to get more specific. Because obviously, you know, I want to help her because it's her
For
last
sure.
year.
For
and
sure.
All I know is they live with their mom. They have no dad or anything.
Okay.
So they're living with family also. So it's not like they own anything.
Right.
So.
Christina, do you have Glendy's contact?
I do.
Okay.
Okay.
So let's do this. Christina, if you could pass me her contact information, and then Glendy, I'll reach out to you.
Okay.
And then maybe we can sort of talk further about the specifics, and
Okay.
I can definitely help you and your student out.
That would be so great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you feel like you have other students that are sort of in the same boat,
well, I'm sure she will, because she has 2 other brothers, so they will be in the same situation.
Oh, okay.
Eventually too. So.
Yeah. And yeah, we'll definitely, you know, get her the resources that she needs, and
Okay.
we'll figure this out specifically for her.
Okay. My other question, I know you said, because I was listening in, because we've been trying, my daughter is 2. So we've been looking at putting a college fund for her, but you were talking about like how to do it so that doesn't affect her later on.
Yeah.
Or, but you can tell me that in the email if you'd like to. Because like you said, she's getting money like from her grandparents and stuff, but we're just holding it. So I don't want to do anything that'll affect her later.
Yeah. So I would say, just sort of right off the bat, the sort of go-to is a 529 college savings plan.
Okay.
And, you know, if we had a further discussion, it might be more advantageous for actually grandpa and grandma to open that 529 plan in their name as owners.
Oh, okay.
And then have your daughter be the beneficiary, so that by the time she's 17, 18 years old and applying to college, that asset does not appear on the financial aid forms because it's owned by grandpa and grandma and not you.
Okay. That'd be good then to tell them too. Because I think they did open something for her, but I don't know if it's in her name or their name.
Mm-hmm. And the other advantage for grandpa and grandma, I don't know if they live out of state or not.
They do.
Oh, okay. So something that you want to have them check on is some states' plans give you a tax deduction for contributions. So they could actually get some state tax deduction for contributing to her 529 plan.
Okay, that'd be great then. I will let them know.
Yeah, it depends on the state. So yeah, for example, California, our plan, it doesn't give us a tax write-off for contributions.
Oh. I don't know if their state would.
Yeah.
I live in Indiana, so I don't know.
Yeah, so I could check on that for you as well.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's basically my questions, but like I said, mine is specific more to my student. So
yeah, we'll connect.
What do you teach at Burroughs, Wendy?
What?
What class do you teach at Burroughs?
Oh, I'm a ELD instructional assistant. So I work actually at Luther.
Okay.
But we've known these kids since 6th grade, and they're like the sweetest ever. And you can tell they really want to, you know, succeed.
Absolutely.
And I really want to help them out. Because their mom also doesn't know a lot of English, and they don't really know anything so much. So
yeah,
it's hard.
Yeah. Glendy, we'll do absolutely everything that we can to help that student.
Okay, thank you so much.
Of course, thank you for being here.
And I will see you probably next Tuesday to find out. Hopefully she'll join too, now that her mom knows. Okay, thank you.
All right.
Have a good night.
Thanks, Wendy.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So yeah, that's what this is about. That's why we do this, because I mean, every student, regardless of their situation, deserves to go to college, to get higher education, to continue on their journey, their path. And so we as adults, we just got to figure out how to afford it. So we were talking about that divorced, separated situation. I was talking about that non-custodial parent. What if there is that biological parent who does not provide any child support, does not provide alimony, is not going to put anything towards higher education? You should check with the college for what's called a non-custodial waiver form, basically telling the college, look, biological dad, we have no contact. He's not going to give us any money for college. So some schools will need verification of that.
Yeah.
Let's get into sources of financial aid. Where are we taking our pillowcase to? Where are we gathering up all of these funds, right? Federal government is sort of the largest and number one avenue or resource for financial aid because it comes in various forms. This is our tax money. So we might as well go get some of our money back if we can. So the federal government uses our tax money, it doles it out in the form of a Pell Grant. So right now, based on income and assets, if you're in a lower income household, you could receive a Pell Grant. That's free money. A grant is free money. And right now the Pell Grant could be as much as $5,500 per year, right? A supplemental educational opportunity grant is also from the federal government. And that's for qualifying low income households. And that amount sort of varies. It could be $1,500, it could be $3,000. College work study is also based on need, and that comes from the federal government. On average, the work study award at most colleges is anywhere from $1,500 to, I've seen it as high as $4,000 a year. So you go, well, my student's going to have a job on campus. That's not that much if a school costs $85,000. You're right. It's not that much. But it allows the student to have skin in the game and take responsibility for working and having what they earn go towards their tuition. So you could opt to take the money, but that's going to be taxable income for the student. So most students will just put it right towards tuition, right? They have an on-campus job. Maybe they work anywhere from 5 to 10 hours per week. Some students work more to make more and pocket some, right? But somewhere around 5 to 8 hours a week of work. It could be in the admissions department. It could be, I don't know, landscaping, like all different kinds of jobs on a campus. When I was in college, I had a work study job. I worked in the college mailroom. And I sorted mail and I drove a little white car around and delivered mail to all the academic departments. And that was my job for the first 2 years until I became a teacher's assistant for one of my history professors. And that was a work study job as well. A majority of our tax money comes back to us in the form of loans or money that we can borrow. So the money is coming back to us, but then the government is using it to make money off of us again, right? And in most cases, that's in the form of what's called a Stafford loan. And there's two versions of that, a subsidized and an unsubsidized Stafford loan. And I'm going to get into those specifically in just a second because they are sort of the student loan that most students are going to get. You could get a Perkins loan, which offers a much lower interest rate. And then, of course, the federal government funds parent loans. So a PLUS loan is a parent loan. And a parent can take or borrow up to the full cost of attendance if they wanted to. So let's talk about the Stafford loan. Every student is going to qualify, regardless of income and assets, for a Stafford loan, right? And in the first year, they could get a Stafford loan of up to $3,500 for the first year, $4,500 for the second, $5,500 for the third and fourth years. And I put student in red here, underscore that, because this is in the student's name. They are the borrower, and then they must be responsible for repayment, meaning they're on the hook, they're on the line. Now, you may help fund those monthly payments in repayment if you wanted to. That's what my dad did. So my father did not save up a lump sum for college, but he said, Bryan, to help you on the backside, once you graduate, I'll make your monthly student loan payment. So thanks, Dad. Every single one of my payments was made on time because it was my dad, and he paid it off in the 10-year repayment period. So I never defaulted. I was never late, right? So they do not check your credit. This is just sort of a given from the federal government. It's an entitlement program. You can defer payments on a subsidized Stafford loan while you are in school, plus 6 months grace period after you graduate. So you're not paying monthly payments on this loan while you're in school. Right? So if I borrow $3,500 my freshman year, I don't have to make any payments on it until I graduate, plus a 6-month grace period thereafter. Then I start on a standard 10-year repayment plan. The current interest rate is 2.75%. This has come down significantly. It was only 5-6 years ago that this was 6.78%. Obama administration brought it down. And now, because of the pandemic, typically the interest rate changes every July. And this last July, because of the pandemic, they brought it down to 2.75. So just know that maybe in future years, this interest rate could go back up, right? But it's 2.75 for monies borrowed in this particular year. So sometimes when people graduate, they borrowed every year and they have a different interest rate for every year, right? That's why we'll consolidate loans and get an average of those 4 years of interest. So you're not paying all these different rates. So I could get a $3,500 subsidized Stafford loan where I'm not making any repayments while I'm in school, and interest is not accruing while I'm in school on a subsidized Stafford loan. So it's not growing. I borrowed $3,500. When I graduate, it's $3,500 that I owe. Now, the difference between a subsidized and unsubsidized loan is that they'll give you an additional $2,000 to borrow, but it's unsubsidized, meaning that $2,000 is going to have interest accruing while you're in school. They are not subsidizing the interest. So that $2,000, if I borrow it freshman year, is going to be much bigger at the end of 4 years. Right? It's going to be growing at almost 3% a year. That repayment can be deferred, but just know that the interest clock is running. So, I should also say that that extra $2,000 in unsubsidized is applied every single year. So I could take a total of $5,500 for my first year, $6,500 for my second year, $7,500 for third and fourth year. But a part of it has no interest accruing and a part of it has interest accruing. Okay, mom and dad, what if you have to borrow money from the federal government? I put it in red, underscored, this is a parent loan. This is in your name. This is based on your credit history. So they're going to do a credit check. They're going to look at your credit score. This is always unsubsidized, meaning interest starts accruing once you borrow. So interest is building as you're repaying it. Okay. Typically, repayment starts as soon as the money is dispersed to the college. Now you got to start paying it back. There is an option to defer those payments. but interest is accruing. So if you're not paying it down, it's only getting bigger. And it's getting bigger quicker than a student loan because the current interest rate is 5.3%. And this has actually come down during this pandemic. On average, the PLUS loan used to be 7% a year or two ago. This is also on a 10-year repayment plan. So then sometimes people ask, like, why are people still paying off their student loans? They graduated like 20 years ago. Some people, to lower their monthly student loan payments, will not only consolidate and combine their loans, but will also extend the life of the loans to lower the monthly payments, right? So we can extend the length of that repayment period from the standard 10-year to 15, 20, 30 years. But just know that you're going to pay more in the long run by lowering your monthly now. You could end up quadrupling what you have to pay off. So in a standard 10-year repayment plan, most people end up paying off double what they borrowed because of interest and time. So if we extend that longer out 20, 30 years, now we could potentially end up paying off quadruple what we originally borrowed. And that's why these things just go on and on and on and on. Let's talk about the Cal Grant real quick. So we've talked about federal aid. Let's talk about state aid. There are benefits for California residents who qualify. Several years ago, there was something called the Middle Class Scholarship, where California had this really great idea that to help out like our middle class income wage earners, that on a sliding scale, a portion of tuition and fees, up to 40% of it sometimes, would be covered by this middle class scholarship. And then the state of California had budget and deficits and then couldn't fund it. So there were a couple of years where students didn't get money from the middle class scholarship. The majority of California state funding comes in the form of Cal Grant. Like I said before, this is the only sort of instance where GPA and your income and assets cross paths, right? So a Cal Grant can be used for any type of school that a student wants to attend in the state of California. So they can't just be a resident of California. They have to be a resident and go to a California school. So you can't say, oh, I'm going to use my Cal Grant at NYU. Not going to happen. So you can go to a community college, a trade school. You could go to a private 4-year, a public, a UC, a Cal State. It could be used at any institution as long as it's within the state of California, right? So it's based on income and assets and GPA. Minimum GPA is 3.0. You have to complete your FAFSA. That's part of the qualification. That's how they check to see if you have need on the income side. You have to do that by March 2nd. And then your student's high school has to send verification of your student's GPA to the Cal Grant administration. Most high schools automatically electronically send every senior in the state of California's in their senior class to Cal Grant administration. But I just pause here because some schools don't, unless the student actually fills out a form and requests it from their high school. So just make sure your student gets that done. To give you an example of the amount of money that Cal Grant could give you, if you qualify, depending on your income and assets, you could get as much as over $12,000, almost $12,500 in Cal Grant money. That's free money. So that could cut a Cal State in half. That could almost be half of a UC right there. So Cal Grant is a big deal. Obviously, If you go to a Cal State or to, say, a community college, you don't need $12,000 at Pasadena City College or Glendale City College or Pierce, just because cost of attendance is not even that much. Cost of attendance is like $5,000. So those awards, depending on the kind of school that you're going to, could be less. Also, something that I want to mention here from the state is that there are certain loan forgiveness programs offered by the state depending on the field that your student wants to go into as a professional. So if your student wants to be a teacher, a healthcare professional, they want to go into the military, they want to go into public service, become a civil servant, there are loan forgiveness programs. So for example, when I was going into teaching, my roommate, he was going to go teach math and physics in a low income and test performing area in LA. And in a loan forgiveness program, they forgave $19,000 of his student loans. He just had to teach in that particular kind of area for at least 3 years, and they would forgive his loan. So $19,000 just erased like that. So also have your student be on the lookout for these types of loan assumption or forgiveness programs. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Let's talk about appealing a financial aid award. Let's say your student applies, they get in, you did your FAFSA, you did your CSS profile. It's always very helpful to ask for more money. Seems like a no-brainer, but a lot of parents don't do it because it just takes time, energy, and some forethought. But my philosophy is it doesn't hurt to ask. And the worst thing that they could say is no. Well, then you have an answer. So as soon as your student is accepted, review their financial aid package. And if you feel like, man, they just did not give us enough aid, how are we going to make this work? It pays off to communicate with the college. Your student has already been accepted. I mean, you guys should be on the same side of the table. So it's about going back to the college and not negotiating, but appealing. So negotiating means, hey, let's strike a deal. Hey, USC, my student also got into this other school and they're giving us $20,000. Can you match that? No. Colleges don't like to negotiate. They don't like to be backed into a corner because what are they going to say? Well, then have your student go to the other school.
Right.
Right? That doesn't work. So appealing can work where you go to that school and you say, you know what? We're so excited. Our student got in, but we're just not quite there in terms of the numbers. We need to tell you more about our financial situation because like we said, the FAFSA and the CSS profile don't ask about certain things. So maybe it's you have to show that you've had a 50% drop in income. Maybe you need to show hospital bills. Maybe you need to talk about, your aging mother who you've had to support. Like all of these things bundled together gives a better, clearer picture of your household situation. And in most instances, colleges will do what they can to find additional funds to get your student there because remember, they need customers. So why would they pass up on an opportunity to have another customer who they've already identified as we want that customer? We've accepted them. So there are going to be schools that are going to say, no, sorry, we just don't have any more funds, or they're earmarked or budgeted for other students. There's just nothing else we can do. Well, then now you know what you're working with. But if the school can say, you know what, actually, based on what you're telling us, based on your current hardships, we can give you another $5,000 of free money. We can give you another $10,000 of free money.
Could you go back again after that? Does it ever, is there a back and forth with it or is it kind of
there can be where you can say, you know what, thank you guys so much for giving us 5. We absolutely appreciate that. But we're we're going to jeopardize our students' like higher education. We're risking their education if we can't afford this. So like to get there, we need like $3,000 more dollars. Is there any way, even if it's not free money, can you find another 1,000 for work study, and between a little bit more work study and, something. And most schools will try to do that. I've seen situations where schools have created almost a fictitious scholarship. They've come back and said, your student now has the presidential scholarship, where they gave more money. It's like, this is not even a thing. But they wanted to help, right? So they had to call it something. I've had situations where schools have come back with $32,000 extra dollars in free money. Now, it does take extreme situations to do that. So whether it's a single income, whether it's a single parent who lost that income this year, we have to sort of prove the situation and the need, because maybe 2 years ago it looked just fine, right? But that's what the appeal is for, to get a review of your situation with additional info. And they may ask you to fill out extra forms and maybe provide documentation of those hospital bills. But that's why we need aid. That's why we need help, because life is happening. So it doesn't hurt to ask. Next time, we are going to talk about strategizing for developing a plan. As we approach these financial aid forms, as we sort of compare that to the types of schools that our students are applying to, how do we put together a strategy to make this happen? Between the loans, between out of pocket, between what we've saved, between other community resources, between appealing, like all of that, how can we make this happen for our students? So now that we sort of know the basics of financial aid and some of that terminology and how things work, now we'll start putting together that plan. And then in the third session, we'll actually walk step by step through the form.